So that's the situation unfolding before my eyes. Observing my sister's in-law's house from a distance, the revelation left me utterly speechless. Contemplating the intentions of my sister's husband and his family towards her over time, I couldn't help but wonder how many times they had deceived her with a poker face. Unforgivable. Regardless, I was determined to bring them all to justice. My name is Sally, and at 45, donning funeral attire for the first time in years, I was dismayed to find that the dress wouldn't zip up around my stomach area. Initially thinking my figure hadn't changed much since I last wore the dress at 30, it became evident that visceral fat had taken its toll. The first time I wore that dress was at my sister Jane's funeral. She had a weak heart since childhood and tragically succumbed to pneumonia, leading to heart failure at the age of 27. I vividly recalled our last conversation in her hospital room, as she expressed her dreams and wishes for the future. Her premature departure left me with a heavy heart. On the date of Jane's funeral, unable to accept the tragedy, I stumbled upon a disturbing incident just before the ceremony began. In the restroom, I overheard Jane's husband, Bob, talking on the phone at a nearby lounge. The conversation hinted at secrecy and plans to lay low until a mass for the deceased about a year later, which perplexed me. Eavesdropping was not my habit, but the contents of Bob's conversation intrigued me. Did deceased refer to Jane? The way he spoke suggested a clandestine discussion, raising questions about who he was talking to. Shockingly, he mentioned having a child, a revelation that baffled me, as there were no children between Jane and Bob, given their decision not to risk childbirth due to Jane's health. Confused and astonished by Bob's revelation, my mind raced. However, amidst the chaos, I recalled Jane's desperate attempt to share something with me before her surgery. "There's a child at home," were her last words, as she slipped into unconsciousness. Unfortunately, she never woke up, leaving me as the sole witness to those cryptic words. Until now, the overwhelming shock of losing Jane had consumed me, leaving little room for contemplation about the meaning behind her final words. However, when I connected Jane's mention of home with Bob's cryptic comment about staying at home, a revelation struck me. Sally wouldn't refer to their parents' house as home. It was just home. Yet there were no children in their family home. Upon reflection, a sudden realization dawned on me. Could it be that the child Bob spoke of on the phone was residing at his parents' home? The mere thought unsettled me, and I found it impossible to remain seated. If my suspicion held true, forgiveness for Bob seemed unthinkable. After paying my respects at Jane's memorial service, a burning desire to validate my theory took over. Without hesitation, I left the funeral home and headed straight for Bob's parents' house, conveniently located within walking distance from Jane's former residence. Being Bob's only child, and with aging parents, they had opted to live nearby. Despite Jane's concerns about increased family interactions, the reality was quite the opposite, with rare visits and minimal family engagement. Even during Jane's funeral, Bob's parents displayed little sorrow over her misfortune, preoccupied with their phones. Their lack of sympathy in such a situation left me disconcerted. Arriving at Bob's parents' house, I hesitated to ring the doorbell, considering everyone should be at Jane's funeral. However, uncertainty lingered. What if someone emerged? What could I possibly say without concrete evidence of Bob's betrayal? Lacking confidence to confront an adversary with incomplete information, I circled around to the back of the house and peered through an open window, providing a clear view of the room. To my surprise, I spotted movement. Could someone really be there? As my heart raced, a child, unmistakably resembling Bob, darted into the yard, pursued by an unfamiliar woman. Instinctively, I concealed myself in the shadows, observing the scene unfold. The child, unsteady on his feet, mirrored Bob's features. The woman, seemingly Bob's age, bore a striking resemblance to the child, leaving little doubt she was the mother. A wave of realization hit me. Had Bob truly betrayed my sister? When did this betrayal begin? And when did Jane discover the truth? Although my suspicions seemed to align, A cascade of unanswered questions left me restless, and, unexpectedly, tears welled up, signaling a storm of emotions within. I harbored an unrelenting grudge, vowing never to forgive him. In my sister's stead, I pledged to send that man straight to hell. Following this resolution, I managed to return to the funeral home and participate in my sister's burial in the churchyard. Despite the suspicions of those attending the service, who thought I had left due to the shock of losing Jane, my explanation seemed to be accepted. No one suspected that I had ventured to Bob's house, and it was a relief that even my sister's in-laws didn't detect anything amiss. The next day, driven by determination, I promptly arranged for a personal investigation on Bob. Surprisingly, the only private investigator in town happened to be Jane's friend, Layla, whom I remembered from the funeral. To my astonishment, Layla disclosed that Jane, too, had initiated an investigation on her husband before falling ill and passing away. Despite confidentiality obligations, Layla believed Jane would have wanted me to know. With that, she shared the circumstances and results of the investigation Jane had commissioned. Jane and Bob had nearly called off their engagement, once due to Bob's cold feet, expressing doubts about his ability to protect Jane with her weak heart. After agreeing to some distance, they reconciled, and the wedding proceeded. Despite appearances, Bob had been involved in an affair with his childhood friend, Nancy. Right after getting engaged to Jane, Bob and Nancy had history, having previously dated and broken up over a minor disagreement. Despite his engagement to Jane, Bob remained emotionally attached to Nancy. Nancy, now pregnant, rekindled their connection, leading to Bob's reluctance to divorce Jane and marry her. This internal conflict, unbeknownst to Jane, was a lie. Nancy stood firm, stating that she would have the baby but wouldn't insist on marriage. Bob found himself torn between acknowledging a child with the woman he loved and keeping this secret from Jane. Unable to refuse Nancy's wish to keep the baby, Bob eventually confided in his parents, who suggested allowing Nancy to have the child, as it would be their first grandchild. Bob's parents had long favored Nancy due to their shared history and disapproved of Jane for her frailty, expressing concerns about her ability to provide them with a grandchild. The weight of Jane's resentment fueled my determination to seek vengeance. The thought of Bob and his parents getting a grandchild, with Bob remarrying, was unbearable. However, being newly aware of the situation, I felt lost and unsure of what steps to take. After some contemplation, an idea struck me. I approached Layla, asking if she was proficient with computers. Her affirmative response filled me with hope. The next day, I went to my sister's in-law's home and rang the doorbell. My sister's mother-in-law appeared on the monitor, visibly surprised. "Sally, what's going on?" she inquired, her voice heightened. "I have something to discuss with the family about Jane's belongings. Do you have a moment?" I responded. The intercom went silent, and I grew anxious, wondering if I would be denied entry. After a brief wait, Bob appeared, apologizing for the messy room and inviting me inside. Perfect timing, I thought, as I noticed the tension in Bob's expression. He likely believed I hadn't discovered his infidelity yet. Little did he know that I had just glimpsed his mistress and their child through the window. As I sipped the tea they served me, Bob nervously asked about Jane's belongings. Seizing the moment, I laid out a photograph on the table. Bob and his parents froze as they gazed at the photo. "Bob, who is this woman?" I questioned. Bob, attempting to deny any knowledge, insisted he didn't remember the photo. Unfazed, I presented more photographs, revealing Bob's affair with the woman in various intimate settings. Despite Bob's protests, his parents glared at him, and I continued to expose the extent of his betrayal. My sister's mother-in-law sharply retorted to Bob's memory lapses, accusing him of lying. When my sister's mother-in-law mentioned the child with Nancy, I immediately presented a photograph of Bob holding a child. The entire in-law family was left speechless. Though Bob continued to deny the accusations, my sister's mother-in-law slapped him, calling him a worthless son. As I probed further, asking if there were other children, My sister's in-laws ignored Bob's pleas, berating him for betraying their beloved grandchild. Despite the confrontation, I remained silent about the fact that the pictures were composites made by Layla. I braced myself for the unfolding chaos, and Bob was left speechless in the face of the accusations. In the midst of the turmoil, my sister's mother-in-law inadvertently blurted out the truth, confirming the existence of the child with Nancy. The room fell silent as my sister's in-laws processed the revelation, freezing in place. The weight of the deception hung heavily in the air. The note accompanying the picture claimed, "These children are being taken care of in this house." I challenged this assertion, and my sister's mother-in-law promptly denied its validity. "Are you sure?" I pressed, and she insisted, "Of course, it's not true." Unconvinced, I stood up without waiting for their approval and headed toward the room next door. Bob raised his voice, protesting my intrusion, but I asserted, "If there's nothing to hide, then you should show me." Ignoring their objections, I moved to the next room, stating, "Well, then show me all the rooms." Bob attempted to intervene, but I shook off their protests and peeked into the next room. Not finding what I sought, I ascended to the second floor, determined to uncover the truth. Despite encountering impediments and scraping my knee, the physical discomfort paled in comparison to my sister's pain. Undeterred by my sister's in-laws' attempts to stop me, I reached the second floor and opened the door to a room. To my dismay, there was Nancy and a child sitting on the bed, different from the ones depicted in the picture. Bob turned pale at the sight, and Nancy, puzzled, inquired about the commotion. I confronted Nancy, showing her the doctored photo. Her anger surged, and she crumpled the picture, demanding answers. Bob, attempting to explain, faced Nancy's fury. Seizing the moment, I asserted that Bob had indeed cheated while my sister was still alive. My sister's in-laws were left speechless, holding their heads in the chaos. Nancy confronted Bob, questioning his faithfulness and expressing her disbelief. Bob, too flustered to deny it properly, stumbled over his words, leaving Nancy's suspicions at an all-time high. Though momentarily taken aback by the mention of Photoshop, I stood by my accusations. Nancy, in her justified suspicion, refused to trust Bob any longer. I offered her a grim piece of advice, acknowledging the ruin he had brought upon my sister's life. At my words, Nancy's face stiffened, absorbing the harsh reality of the situation. The revelation of Bob's deceit had left Nancy's life in disarray, mirroring the upheaval that my sister had endured. Observing Nancy's expressions, I recognized that she likely comprehended the gravity of the situation. It became crucial for me to align myself with Nancy, subtly influencing her to believe that we shared a common goal, preventing any happiness for Bob's family or Nancy herself. As Bob desperately tried to win back Nancy's trust, I interjected, highlighting the hypocrisy of his actions. "So you weren't serious about my sister, but you told her you were, even made marriage vows to her. Looks like you really are an untrustworthy man, Bob." Nancy's face darkened, her trust in him wavering as she began to doubt the sincerity of his words. Encouraged by Nancy's skepticism, I continued, emphasizing that genuine commitment meant sticking to one person, regardless of the circumstances. Bob's attempts to explain were futile, and Nancy, tears streaming down her face, decided to end their relationship, declaring, "We should break up, Bob. I don't want to be your convenient woman." As Nancy walked out of the house with her child, leaving Bob's family despondent, I silently celebrated the success of my plan. Later, I compelled Bob to write a legal document severing all family ties and relinquishing any claim to my sister's inheritance. My stern father, having learned the truth, confronted my sister's in-laws, ensuring that not a single penny of my sister's assets would go to Bob. The inheritance was safeguarded, and Bob, with his family, faced the consequences of their actions. The entire neighborhood, having overheard the commotion and revelations, deemed Bob's house cursed, leading him to quit his job and flee the town. 2 months later, Nancy unexpectedly arrived at our family home, seeking forgiveness and making amends for her previous actions. Despite her offering $50,000, we declined the money and insisted it be donated to a children's home where my sister had once worked. Accompanying her to ensure the proper donation, we hoped to bring some good from the unfortunate situation. While Nancy expressed gratitude, I continued to grapple with the loss of my sister, even experiencing mental health challenges. However, I gradually recovered and found solace in working at Layla's detective agency. Layla and I, both having faced significant losses, became close comrades. Over time, I reshaped my view of marriage, recognizing the importance of cherishing moments with loved ones. After 4 years with my partner, we got married last year. The experience of losing my sister during the pandemic reinforced the fragility of life, motivating me to live fully without regrets. In closing, I vowed to live vibrantly for both myself and my sister, promising to share all the joys when we reunite. With this commitment, I embarked on a journey to embrace life to the fullest, carrying my sister's memory with me.